Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we'll Masech the Chulin Daf Lamed Aleph. We're going to begin on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph by the two dots, about 7 lines from the top. So our Mishnah in yesterday's daf said that if you would do the shechita all in one shot, then it's possible. However, it actually depends. If your knife is large enough that's molit savor, literally the size of the width of the neck, then it's fine. So Rabbi Zera molit savor v'chutz savor. It doesn't mean just the width of the neck, but it has to be even longer than that. So iboyhu molit savor v'chutz savor kamolit savor dabli trade savari. Is it that we say that it needs to be more? Does it mean that it has to be the same as a neck width? Namely, now it'll have to be 2. It just has to be even a small amount more than the amount of the knife. And therefore we said, so too, if you have a small knife, so you could, as long as you're moyecha maybe both back and forth, it's fine. However, if you only go in one direction, so then it's a problem unless it's large enough. So this is the question: how large does this knife have to be? So Tashma. So let's say a person shechs 2 animals at the same time with the same knife. So kosher, as long as the knife is the same width as one neck, apparently that's good. So my molit savar, what does that mean? That all the knife has to be is the size of the width of one neck. It doesn't make sense because we added this extra amount called chutz savar for one animal. So if we're dealing with 2 animals, that makes no sense. Obviously, it's got to be more than that. And elab shita molit savar chutz l'shnei svarim shemamino molit savar chutz l'savar shemamino. So therefore, the knife must be the size of 2 neck lengths. That's what the answer is, as we can see in question 10. Mahu shir oirech hasaken uchol pachais im shoichet b'mashicha achas hoylacha oy haba. And the answer is molit savar, the chutz savar kamolit savar, which is 2 necks. Okay. And then we said the only time you have to have a really large knife like that, it's only you went in one direction. If you went in both directions, you can have even a small knife. When we're talking about this little knife, it's she'ein lo karnayim. It cannot have any horn-like protrusions, because then it will cause tearing, which obviously is not allowed. And why would anyone have these horn-like protrusions? Lenoi al gabehen. Rashi says that it was for beautification purposes. Zomerle Rav Acha Bered the Rav Avil Rav Menashe Mechatov. If a person takes a needle, what's the din? We said that yesterday. We saw Rabbi Yonah who shechted a bird by shooting an arrow. So how about with a needle? So Omerle Mechta, when it comes to a mechet, the needle mivza baza. Because it's pointy, it's not going to cut. Says Rashi, maybe because it's very narrow and sharp at the edge. Hu noikev the karei of l'chaytech. It's just gonna puncture, but it's not gonna actually cut. Mechta deush pachi deush chafi mai. How about when it comes to a needle, which is an awl, A-W-L, says Rashi, Martzeh HaMitzeroyin, when after an Eved Ivri, after 6 years, and he says, Ohavdi as Adaini Vesishti, so we bring him to the door, and we pierce his right ear with an awl. So this is a different type of needle. So Omerle Tanina Filu Koshahu. We said even the smallest amount. So my la mechta dush kafi, that would also work. Lo, ismol. We're talking about a small knife. So ismol behedikatani already said that. So prushika mafarish, my kol shehu ismol. How can I be mistabra? It must be talking about just a knife and not referring to an awl. These are the mechta dush kapi. Hashda mechta dush kafi sharia. If that's allowed, so ismol baboy. So why does he even need to mention a knife, a small knife? So Ismo Esrichale. So that's not a raya, because maybe we need to mention this. Wings are Ismo She'eno Karnaim, Atu Ismo She'eshol Karnaim Kamashmulan. Because a lot of time an Ismo does have these horn-like protrusions, so therefore we should be maybe geyser any of them. Kamashmulan we don't. So therefore there's still a reason to mention that. So it's not necessarily raya. Okay. Let's see the next Mishnah. Naful Sakin. Let's say the knife fell by itself off the roof, and it did a proper shchita. Kedarka psula. It's not going to be a good shchita. It has to be done by a person. It cannot just be happening naturally. Again, a knife on the top of a roof with a ruach matsuya blows it off and it falls off the roof and it does shchita on an animal. That's possible. So it has to be that you're the one that does the zvicha in order for you to be able to eat it. Okay. Let's see the Gemara. So taima the nafal. The only reason why it's problematic is because it fell. Hapilahu kshera. Let's say you threw the knife, right, with your kayach, but you didn't actually do the shchita, but the shchita took place through your flying it. Even without kavana, apparently it still works. Says Rashi, afilu chaticha ba'alma. Let's just to make a cut. Apparently that's good enough. So what do we see? A tremendous chiddush. We see man tana lo be'inan kavana l'shchita. There must be a tana that holds you do not need kavana when it comes to doing the shchita, and it's still good. So who is that tana? So I'm Rav Nasanhi. Why? How do we see that? The Tani Aishia Zeiri Dimin Chavre, he said the following case: Zarek Sakin Lenot Sabakaisel. Let's say you throw, like you see at these places, they throw these butcher knives. It's becoming like a whole fun activity that people do. They throw these butcher knives into like a bullseye. So let's say you took a knife and you wanted to throw into the wall, like almost like a dart, right? But a regular like shchita knife, and so your kavana is just so it should stick into the wall. But holcha v'shachta kedarka, it actually did a shchita. Rav Nasan machshem chamin poislan. So Rav Nasan says it's good. Why? Because he holds that even though your intention was to stick into the wall, but since it came from your kayach, so therefore it's considered to be a good shchita. So Tanu Levi Huarmula Halacha Rav Nasan. Halacha Tach is like him. I ba'omer Rava Chadazimna. Where do we learn this? Dinan, as it says, the Chulin, when it comes to a cheresh shatav katan shishachtu. If they did the shchita, v'acherim roinaiso, provided that people were there to see it taking place, make sure everything was done properly, shchitas and shera. Yamrinan man tana dulo boy kavana shchita. If we're dealing with a katan or a cheresh or shaita, they're not b'nei das. So therefore, obviously, you don't need kavana because they're not shaykh to have kavana. Yomi Rabbi Rav Nasan, he already know this. So tzricha. Even though it seems like the same thing, they actually are a little bit different. Some of them mishum dekam chavnu shum chaticha, but oilum. So at least the cheresh of the katan, there was intention to cut. Here you're just throwing the knife into the wall, imalo. At least the person who was throwing the knife, even though his intention was for it to go into a wall, was done by bendas. So they have different elements to it. Question 11. Kavan. Of course, this is not kosher. This is chulin. So one is when it comes to cheresh katan who does the shchita, everyone's watching it. It's kosher, even though cheresh katan is they don't have das, so they can't have kavana. And if you threw the knife into the wall, it's if our Mishnah says if the knife falls off the roof, mashma if it was thrown off the roof by a person, then it would be good, obviously because you do not need kavana. Okay. So sricha. All right. Itmar. Nida shenensa. So let's say you have a woman who's a nida, and unintentionally v'tavla. Somehow she went into a mikveh and she didn't have the kavana. Exactly, we'll see what that means. It was unintentional. So what's the din? Is she tahayra or not? So I'm Rabbi Yehuda Marav tahayru lebesa. So she can go back to her husband. And they can have tashmish. Yasul echel b'truma, but they're not allowed. She's not allowed to eat truma. And we know that truma is serious business. It's a misa b'di shemayim situation. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan Afla Beisalo Tahara. She also is not able to go to her husband now, which is interesting. Normally, Rav Nachman Rav Di'aymer Tahir LeBeis Ve'Asul Echel B'Truma. I don't understand. Why is he more strict when it comes to Truma than the dinim of Nida? When it comes to BS Nida, it's of Inkaris. Hutter, that he allows, but Isser Misa, which is eating Truma, but boy, doesn't make any sense. And Rashi points out, the Karis Chomer Misa. There's different reasons, different shitas why, but according to Rashi, the reason why he says kares is worse of a punishment than misa b'nishmayim, the yom of nichrosim. He says when it comes to kares, your days are cut. V'zara nichros kedechsiv aririm you, and you also be childless. So that's the shita of Rashi. There's different opinions exactly what is the difference between kares and misa b'nishmayim, but at least that's Rashi. So the question is, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you matter not be concerned of an Isser Kares? So that's a good question, right? So Amalei, beautiful answer though. Bala Chulin hu v'Chulin loy by kavana. Just like we talked about with regard to the shechita of Chulin, according to Rav Nosson, so too be with your husband, even though it's an Isser Kares, but it's Chulin. It's something in which is just a mundane act, if you will. So you don't need kavana for that. So even though she went to the mikveh shlo b'kavana, it works. Mashen came for truma, you have to have kavana. So Mana Tamru, how do we know this din that when it comes to Chulin you don't need kavana? So a lot of this is the third parak in Chagiga, as you'll see on the side, Yud Testament Aleph. Gal, if you have this wave, shenitlash, it got detached from the water. So you could go into the ocean and you're good. You can be toivel into the ocean. However, let's say you have a wave, but it's detached, it comes up from the water. So even though it's true that it's detached, but in since in itself has the requisite measurement of a mikvah, so therefore it can be matahar adam and kalim. So my love adam dum and kalim. Ma kalim dolo mechavani. Obviously, vessels that don't have brains, of no das, it's an inanimate object, there's no kabbalah, still works. Adam nami little boy kabbalah. So too, because we're dealing with chulin, it doesn't need kabbalah. So where's my mind? Dilma biyoshim atzapa askinan. He must say yitla shagal. Right? You have this guy who's just waiting for this huge wave to come. Right? He's a surfer guy waiting for the next big wave. So he actually has kavana. So when that wave comes, I will immerse myself. So really, maybe it does require kavana. The kalim, as we can see, Amid Beis, Duma to Adam. Ma Adam Dabina Kavano Av Kalim Nami de Kamachavanu. So maybe in fact you need to have Kavana the Machavanu Adam. So maybe Pumfaker, maybe Machul and Yitaka do need Kavana. The Chiteim of Yoshim at Sapa Remember, so what's the Chiddush? Obviously, why would it not be good, right? It's Arboim saw, it went on him, he had Kavana, why would it not be a good tefillah? So Ma'adateim Ligzer Mishum Chardalius Shel Geshamim. Maybe we should be concerned of torrential rains. In other words, it's possible that it's not actually coming from the Yam, or maybe some rain got commingled to be mitzaref to the Arboim Saw, which is not enough because it's got to be Arboim Saw from the actual source of the Yam. To keep it, Kamash Mulan, even though it may be Dul Gazrina. So when it comes to this water, so then you would, in fact, if you're immersed in water, it's good, but if you're dealing with a wave, like a surfer, so the surfer goes in the arch, so he's actually, even though the water is surrounding him, but he's not actually being touched by water, and therefore that wouldn't be good. Maybe it'd be geyser for that. No. So, but not time with the why can't you, a surfer, why can't he be toivel in a wave? Dinan matbilin barishan ve'in matbilin bekifin. Why not? She'ein matbilin ba'avir, because you're being toivel in air, right? You have to, the water has to touch you, and it can't be air. Again, we don't have the answer to the question. How do we know it's true when it comes to chulin matters that you do not need kavana? Did not. So let's say you have some fruit that fell into water. Upashat mishiyadav tameos v'natlon. So someone's hands were tamei, and they went and grabbed them, these fruits. So yadav taharais, So because he put his hands in this body of water, now he actually immersed his hands. Now his hands are tahar. Uperos in b'chiyutan, and the fruits are not under the category of b'chiyutan because he didn't really want them to get wet. In order, chiyutan, interestingly enough, requires kavana. In order for it to be machshel kabotoma for yad shachadam, for the 7 different liquids that are machshel kabotoma, but it has to be something in which you wanted. You didn't want those fruit wet. On the contrary, that's why you took them out, so they are not there anymore. However, if let's say you wanted those fruits to soak, then yadav taharos indeed. However, pairs b'chiyutan, there would be tamei. So we see clearly from here that the fact that you put your hands in there, you don't need kavana by chulin. So that's a clear raya. Okay. So Eisvei Rav or Rav Nachman. So now a question is posed to Rav Nachman the following: Tavel chulin. Let's say a person immerses themselves with the machshava only to eat chulin, l'chulin. However, huchsek l'chulin, and his kavana taka is only to eat chulin. In other words, you can go to the mikvah, and that will work for either even higher foods than just chulin. A person who eats chulin, b'kedusha, right, like but tahara. So if let's say you immerse yourself thinking, I want to eat this chulin, and I want to become pure on a chulin level, so asal meiser. So you're only considered to be able to eat chulin but not meiser. And for that matter, it keeps going up as the more chulin talks about in the Gemara in Chagiga talks about. So huksakin lo huksak lo. Now here's a kasha, because it sounds like you had to at least have kavana for the chulin. So in mashma it sounds clear that you do be'inan kavana even for chulin. No, hakam, this is how you read it. Even though you don't need kavana, but even if you did have kavana, but since you only had kavana for chulin, it doesn't work for anything else. You would think maybe since you had kavana, which you don't even need to have for chulin, since you did, maybe it works for other things. No, it only works for chulin. So eisvei. So the Gemara asks another question: Tavel v'huchsuk. If you tavel yourself and you had no kavana, ki'ilu tavel, right? My love ki'ilu tavel kalal, right? It's like you didn't do anything, which is again mashma that you can't even eat chulin, and it's because even chulin needs kavana. Well, ki'ilu tavel meiser. It's like it didn't work for you to be able to eat meiser. Avol tevel l'chulin, avol tevel l'chulin who, but it taka does tavel l'chulin who, but at least does work tavel l'chulin. But Ataka does at least work. You could still eat chulin because it is you don't need kavana. So who's savar dichu ikamadchila? He's like, yeah, you're just pushing me off of this, but it's not true. Nafal dak vashkach. He actually nafak dak vashkach. He delved into the matter and he found exactly as he said. As Desanya, we learned in a brisa, tavav l'huksik. If a person immersed himself without any kavana, mutter l'chulin v'asol meiser. So you see clearly that that's the din. So maybe we should actually use this as a tiyufta to Rav Yochanan. Why is she usher to her husband? Right? Apparently, we see clearly that he was right. That okay, fine, you can't eat truma because she was toivel shlo b'kavana, and that won't work for truma. It should work for chulin. She should be mutter to her husband. So Rav Yochanan, who di'amer Rav Yonasan ben Yosef, the son of Rav Yonasan ben Yosef, the pasuk says the following. The kaivis that you cleanse yourself. You cleanse. Matalamer shenis a second time. So what is this going on? Look at Rashi. Dermil el aflo beisel tahayid. Also to the house again. She can't go. She cannot be intimate with her husband. So nigi bad begadim. When it comes to the tsaras that befalls garments, ksibbe beis kavusim. It mentions laundering them twice. To chavesis rishayna v'kivsu es asher boi b'hanoiga v'hiskiru lirois im yivsa o yamoid o yicha v'kibus sheni l'achar hesker. So the second kibus is after they've already been locked up. Shachar kibus rishon after the first cleansing. Beged o shesi o erev o kol kli or asher tichabis b'rishayna kodim hesker. That was the first time before the closing, and then the second time is after the closing. So what's the connection? So makish tich boises shania litach boises rishayna. We compare the second to the first, and what's that? Ma tich boises Rishayin Ladas. The first time it's with knowledge, with kavana af techbeses sheniya ladas. So therefore, he holds that no, even when it comes to chulin matters, you still need to be able to have, you need to have a proper kavana. So if that's true, malohon be'inan das kayin, nafkan be'inan das kayin. So maybe you actually need das, not just das in general, but das kayin. Tavon number of taher mikol makayim, as long as it's with das. Mask Rav Shimi Bar Yashi, Biyom Rav Yochanan Hachdes, he said, Biyom Rav Yochanan Hachdes Stam Mishnah. We know that Rav Yochanan always holds like a Stam Mishnah without a name. The Tanan, and we learned in the Stam Mishnah, that Nafel Sakin, if the knife fell off the roof, Vishachta, and Shechta, Nafel Mishachta Kedak Kapsula. Right? Vavinamo, we pointed out the time of the Nafel, it's only because it fell by itself. Hapilahu Kshera. Right? Vyafal Gav, Delo Mechavin. So what happened? You threw it, or let's say you pushed it off the roof yourself, so then it would be good, even though there was no kavana. The Amrina and Mantan and the little boy kavana l'shchita of a Rav Nasan. We said that's the shita of Rav Nasan. So how can we say over here this shita that Rav Jonas that Omerle Rav Yochanan, right? So Rav Yochanan holds that you taka need kavana, but we see over here he holds you don't need kavana like the Stam Mishnah. So where is it like this? B'shchita fil Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. So when it comes to shchita, even according to Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, no kavana is needed. Why? So it's an important detail that the pasuk says specifically by kachim that a person shechs without kavana, carbon, then it's possible because the pasuk says, Rashi quotes, or "Tzoinchem tizbachuhu, v'datchem tizbachuhu." As we saw already on Daf Yud Gimel, you have to have das when it comes to kachim, otherwise it's not good. So why does it? In that case, it's a clear diak when it comes to shchita. Whatever you hold in general about kavana, when it comes to chulin, everyone holds you don't need kavana because the diak is that misasek b'kachim, the pasuk says specifically you must have das, you must have kavana. So it must be only by carbon, only by kachim, but not by chulin. Rabbana nihido be'inin kavana zvicha. When he threw the knife into the wall, he had no kavana for cutting at all, right? So fine, you don't need kavana for the shechting. V'chaticha be'inan. So at least to be able to cut it, you need, and therefore the fact that you threw a knife into the wall and an animal just happened to walk by and it did the shchita, they would hold that's not acceptable. Amar Rabbi Baha, Zachnu Rabbi Nasan Rabbanan, and with this he merited. It was as Rashi is Natzchan Kleimer Bezois Nirin Devarim Midavrayim. This is why Rav Nasan, who does not require kavana, seems to be better because miksiv, the pasuk doesn't say v'chatachta, v'zavachta ksiv, right? So it doesn't talk about cutting it; it talks about shechting it. So ibeinin kavana l'chaticha filas vicha nami boy. If you need kavana for cutting, then you should need kavana for shechting. Ilo beinin kavana l'zvicha l'chaticha nami boy, and that's what he says. That you don't need kavana for shechting, so you shouldn't need kavana for throwing it either. So therefore, the case of throwing into the wall, the knife, that all should still work. Hechidami nida shenensa. So let's go back to this case before. What was this case that we said a woman who there was some type of incident she wasn't aware of a tavla, she immersed herself. What was this oinus? That there's a machlokas whether or not she's mutter to her husband. Ilema de ansa chaverta. Let's say that there was some type of incident regarding her friend. V'atbala kavana de chaverta kavana malyasahi. So if that's the situation where again there was an oinus by chaverta, by her friend that immersed. So and it was kavana by her friend. So that should be real good kavana, right? So. Does Rashi explain this a little bit better? Not really. So v'oid b'truma nami ochla. She should be able to eat truma in that case. Denan hachareshes v'shayit v'asuma. In other words, someone else who's a woman who's a chareshes, a shaiter, or someone who's blind, v'shenitfa daito, let's say their mind wasn't so strong, im yesh lehen pikchais, if there's someone who is healthy that is nearby, misakna soisan, that will be misakin them, and oichas betruma, so they could eat truma. So the fact is that if you have someone else that's there, that's able to have kavana for on your behalf or to assist you, so that should also be fine. So that can't be the case of an oinus. Amrav Papa Rav Nasin shenafel min a gesher. Talking about she fell off a bridge, and like she just happened to jump. She fell off a bridge and just got wet in this water. So it's totally not something she was intending. Rabbanan shiyardu lahaker. They say that what happened was her intention was to cool herself off, but she intended to go in at least to bathe. So the question is, did she like have at least intention to bathe, but not necessarily for it to be kind of a mikvah, or was it that she mamash just totally fell in and that was the end of it? Okay, so let's keep going. Rava shachat par v'shachat behema acheres. Let's get to the next mishnah. Let's say you shechted a par dum. Let's hold off. We're gonna see. We'll go to the mishnah. But let's see. Maybe there's a question over here. TA30. Okay, we didn't get to that yet. TB2. Maharaya shall Rab Nosin deshchita l'boy kavana. Afil it betfila boy kavana uma ha dechia shel Rabbana. Ooh, not exactly sure what they're asking over here. Lazaro. Omen a mishnah sheneshchita kasher im asakin neifel atzmo evil avol im nafel min ha'adam b'lo kavana shchita kasher avol yesh kayach shel ben das o medin cheres shayt v'katan sheshach b'fanav shehu kasher v'hemlo hayidas lios kavana. I don't know if that's what they're looking for. It sounds like I knew what I'm talking about, and unfortunately I don't have an answer key here. I don't think that's necessarily what's being asked here. I think the point is that the raya that shchita does not require kavana is based on this line that misasek. I think this is what it is by misasek bekachim. I would say this is more in line to the right answer. We see that the issue of misasek only is an issue there, right? This is what they were looking for, but when it comes to chulin, it's okay. And the Rabban will say, no. Maybe you don't need to have kavana to shech, but at least you have to have kavana l'chaticha. Right? So I'm going to say this is not what they were looking for, and I'm going to say davka b'kadshim ksiv v'zavachta. Right? What's the lashon? Misasik b'kadshim posel, because it says tiz b'chuhu. Let's write that. Tiz b'chuhu mashma chulin little boy kavana. And the Rabbanan will say Nikol Makoim Chaticha, right? The cutting boy kavana. Okay, I think that's what they were looking for. That's TB2. Okay. All right, let's move on. Amarava. Shachat para. Person shechs the para duma, which of course is what you're supposed to do. However, v'shachat behema acheres ima. We talked about this already. If you're shechting another animal together with it, which means you're diverting your attention from what you're supposed to do, and this is just chulin, a chulin animal. So l'direi kol psula. Why? Why is the paraduma puzzle? You have to specifically do the shchita of the par. You can't be multitasking over here. And the paraduma is quite expensive. It would be a pretty big mistake. So you can't do that. Let's say you shecht another animal, but it's without kavana. The other one was with kavana. This is chulin. This is you shech the paraduma, and then you shech chulin shlo b'kavana ima. So Rab Nasin para psula, behema kshera. Now, Rav Nosson, interestingly enough, the fact that he says that it does not require kavana, so therefore that animal, the chulin, will be a kosher shchita. However, because therefore, since it was a kosher shchita, you did an action in which was considered constitutes the malacha cheres, that makes the paraduma possible. Rabbanan, interestingly enough, parak sher behema psula, because it was necessary for you to have kavana for that chulin animal, and you didn't, so that animal's possible, and therefore, since it became possible, it's not considered to be an avodah acheres, and therefore, it's like you didn't do anything other than the shechting the paraduma, and that's why the paraduma was good. Now, pshita nishchad behema acheres, well, Rav Nosson is tzrichalei. So the chiddush is according to the shita of Rav Nosson. The chiddush is according to Rav Nosson, the shchita is good and the paraduma is not good. What's the chiddush? They have to shecht it. When it comes to paraduma, you cannot shecht it with another animal. What is that talking about? Maybe it's talking about when somehow you got lucky, you struck gold. You have two parei dumais that you shecht at the same time. Maybe if you shecht the paraduma together with the chulin one, maybe it doesn't cause any problem with the paraduma. Kamash Malan, it doesn't mean you can't shecht a chaverta means another paraduma, it means another animal. Fine. So again, if chulin, we see over here, if chulin didn't need kavana, so the shechita is good, so then the par is possible, as you can't shecht together with chaverta. Chatach dalas, and let's say you, while doing the paraduma, you're shechting, you're cutting a melon. You can imagine you're cutting watermelon with a paraduma, right, or whatever it is, some gourd, and you're doing that with the kavana. You must do go psula, because that's considered to be a real action. You're a real utility. You're doing something. Nechtacha dalas ima divrei kol ksher. Let's say, on the other hand, you're cutting it, but you had actually no intention of cutting it. Somehow it just happened to have happened. So in that case, everyone will say it's kosher, because even though you did an action, but it's like it's kilo, like you didn't do anything. So therefore, it's shelo b'kavana. You didn't even intend to do it. So therefore, like you weren't didn't have hesach hadas from the paraduma. Okay, we'll stop there. Question 12. Ketzal chareshes oy shaitan the taharis lecha b'truma var tvila boy kavana ve'ein ve'elu ein behen das. How is it possible that this works? So he said pichais matbilois. If someone who's healthy is toivel, v'kavanasan v'kavanasan kavana malya hi l'tfila. So again, the question is, how does it work? So if you are, this is what it says over here, so like if together with this person it's done, then they could be masakin it, so it's ki'ul, like everything is fine. TA 30. Shachat para duma v'nishkata below kavana behema cheresima madin masad l'poisla. So this is Amid Beis Amid Aleph, and it's machlokas. According to Rabbanan, the paradum is kosher because the behema that you shechted is possible because you need kavana even by chulin, right? However, according to Rav Nosson, the paradum is possible because the shechita that you did was kosher. Right? So that's the idea. Let's see what I wrote. I know I wrote it wrong. Yesh iser shlo laso shum davar avoda acher kasher ata sheichet as a para aduma. Ubishvil zeh aser avolahu. Okay. Rak im savar shechulin lo boy kavana. The chulin is kosher, right? Then the para is pasul. Okay, that's the correct answer for TB 30, TA 30. So let me just mark this over here to the very top. TA 30. Nishchata behema cheresima. Rav Nosson par psula behema kshera. Rabbanan par kshera behema psula. Okay, which is that? Which is the Rashi. TB 3. Definitely not. Adkan.